I do not like the King of the Hill reboot. And part of this is because I genuinely just don't like some of the things like the pacing and the writing decisions, outside of my politics as a chud. But some of it does have to do with my like chuddy politics, to be honest. And it might sound crazy, but I feel like they're doing another woke reboot with King of the Hill, but not like the other woke reboots where they go like full force in with the woke stuff right away. I feel like they're taking a frog boil approach, like they're just slowly inching towards the woke stuff, just as much as people can tolerate, as much as big chunks of the old fans can tolerate. Mostly the older boomers that watched it. The kind of boomers that might have leaned kind of right, but nowadays are just like, oh, well, things change. I can accept this new insanity or whatever, if you know the types I'm talking about. And, I'm not saying King of the Hill never had woke moments before, because, they have like a female reverend. That's one thing. It's one example. There was Peggy becoming friends with drag queens who are portrayed as just like totally normal people with a hard life or whatever. But even before the rival, the shows had like less woke moments, had like more anti woke moments, if you will, that aren't really present in the new seasons. Like Hank would explicitly show disgust or rejection towards transgender ideas. Even even outside of deleted scenes, because there are deleted scenes where he does as well. And all the alley guys, they dislike fruity or flamboyance or the lack of masculinity. Basically, they were pretty like masculine, manly man guys. They like sports. They don't like lazy people who are just kind of effeminate, I guess, or weak. And the revival doesn't really put Hank in a position where he's forced to make explicit declarations of his stances on more woke stuff. But it feels like the reboot tries to, in a subtle way, express the acceptance of woker things. Anyway, I thought it might be fun to give some small rundowns on my opinions on the newest season. Not the first reboot season, the second one. And I won't give too much info on most of them because I'm assuming you watched them. So you might want to watch them all before watching this video. But anyway, here we go. Here are my opinions on the episodes and, why I may or may not like them without much detail added. And number one is failure to hard launch. And, that episode, it's all right. It's funny enough. It just has weird pacing, which goes for most of the episodes, by the way. Just assume whenever I talk about an episode, it has weird pacing, because that's like a consistent thing I see. It doesn't totally ruin it, but it's definitely noticeable when you compare them to the older episodes. Anyway, the episode's fine. I like Emilio. Emilio is one of the better additions to the show, honestly. And just a little bit put off by the vulgarity, which is a little bit kind of kind of hard to get used to, with how reserved some of the language in the old King of the Hill was. But other than that, that's just a me thing more than anything else. But it's a decent episode. Number two is Care of the Dog. And I don't like the way this one was structured. It feels like it kind of cuts to the resolution really fast. I feel like the older episodes might have been more. They might have paced out the Hank warming up to the new dog better. And I feel like it's kind of out of character for Hank to just spill his guts out. Even if it is at Lady Bird's grave, maybe that's just him put in a situation we haven't seen before. Maybe it's justified, but me personally, I feel like that's very not Hank to just spill his guts out like that at the end. The Con and Min stuff is kind of funny. It's probably one of the best things they could have done with the whole divorce arc. Even if I still think the divorce arc was a mistake, I feel like they should have kept Con and Min together. But it's still one of the best things they could have done with it. So, uh, okay episode, but I don't really like it. Three is Searching for Bobby Fischer. It's probably one of the more relevant episodes because I actually had a relative fall for one of the fake AI voice scams, and so Hank does too here, and it's all right. Like Hank's naivety is pretty in character and realistic here. The Hank and Bobby argument does feel a little bit forced, but it wasn't terrible. But yeah, it does kind of hit close to home the way the police aren't able to really help Hank here. All they're able to do is advise him to avoid it next time, which is a real thing a lot of people probably go through. And episode 4 is Hank Encounters of the Nerd Kind. I just really don't like this one because it has a glaring plot hole where everyone at the convention just lets the thief get away after he admits to stealing Bobby's pass. And it seems like they do it just because Hank was rude to them, but it's Bobby's pass anyway. So, it's already unjustified, but then they're like taking it out on Bobby in a way, who is not hostile and is actually one of them. He's dressed up for the convention too, but they just let the other guy get away because his dad's kind of rude. But yeah, it just feels like a big plot hole. I do like the Peggy and Min stuff here. I feel like it's really funny in that episode. Uh, I do kind of feel like it's weird how Min straight up hates Peggy though, because I feel like in the old show it was more like they were kind of frenemies because they did hang out and they did do stuff together. It's just that Peggy and Min specifically could get kind of competitive and take jabs at each other. But here though, it feels like Min just like straight up hates Peggy. Like an actual enemy or something, which is kind of weird to me because I just don't feel like that's how they were pre-revival. And number 5 is the best little marriage in Texas. And I really hate this episode because as a Christian, I find it really insulting how they treat Nancy's adultery as some small thing that shouldn't keep her from teaching the couples at the couples retreat. Just because it makes her feel happy. Like, oh, well, she feels fulfilled and happy. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter that much that she's an adulterer. And, it's not even like she stopped. It's not even like this is a past Nancy who's like past the cheating and everything. Because they mentioned that she's like back into it. They restarted the affair. And they want to act like, the sanctity of this church retreat is just like it doesn't matter. As a Christian, I feel just kind of insulted that they're saying that. Like, I do feel like Hank and Peggy are more fit to teach the couples retreat. And I find it kind of insulting that they dare to kind of, not explicitly, but they like subtly compare Hank and Peggy's like communication issues, which are pretty minor in the first place, to Nancy and Dale's cheating in a way. And they kind of like frame it as Hank and Peggy being the ones who need to be taught or something like that. But yeah, they just kind of glaze over Nancy still cheating and still treat it like it's not really justified to take her out of there. And even at the end, she just kind of goes back to it. She goes back to teaching and they don't care. And they just kind of they kind of rush and just cut off John Redcorn. Nancy says she doesn't want to see him again. Not like that, but she says her headaches have stopped or something like that, she says. Redcorn does the Indian tear crying thing, which is a funny joke. And, I feel like as a plot point for something so serious, even if it's a recycled plot point, because Nancy already left John Redcorn in a previous episode before the revival, a big plot point like that deserves its own focused episode instead of just some quick little clip at the end of another episode where it's not the focus. But yeah, I get it. John Redcorn's VA is dead, so they probably couldn't do that. But yeah, I probably dislike that episode. That's like one of my most hated episodes. Anyway, on to the next episode, episode 6, Changes. I don't like either parts of this episode because the kind of Bill stuff feels too cartoony because Bill acts exactly like a dog. And then the show kind of acts like Dale and Boomhauer are really stupid for, coming to the conclusion that Khan's training Bill like a dog, even though he's acting exactly like one. It just feels a bit too wacky for King of the Hill's usual down to earth tone. And the Hank and Peggy stuff feels really out of character. Like Hank doesn't hesitate as much as I feel like he actually would if he's buying weed. And the episode's pretty one-sided with Hank going to the dispensary. There's a bunch of, just fairly put together people. There's no lazy stoners or anything. Hank goes up and he spits out some pro marijuana talking points. And the writers try to make you not realize this is out of character because Hank says these pro marijuana talking points and he just says them kind of nervously, and that's it. It's not the same. This isn't the same guy who was panicking after he lit his cigarette with a blunt and got his eyes a little pink and he was panicking and running away from the police just for that. The guy who like shuddered when he was asked to sign a petition to for hemp for whatever reason. This isn't the same guy. And the guy who's at the dispensary is well put together and everything. I feel like the older writers would have at least, shown both sides kind of. They would have shown there are just lazy stoners who like to use it for fun. And they might have gone into the reasons why some people still want it illegal. Instead of just being like, oh, well, it's a good thing actually. It's a good thing and this is why Hank is fine with it now. But anyway, yeah, that's why I don't really like that episode. In episode 7, Hank ruffles some feathers. I actually like the side plot in this one with Bobby, because he sees Connie's taking his advantage of him when he agrees to fill in as a mascot so she can learn how to be one. But then she just like starts studying and not paying attention, and Bobby gets kind of fed up with that. Or Joseph like opens his eyes to it. And so yeah, that plot's good. My only kind of joking complaint is that there's no way in heck Bobby is athletic enough to do a cartwheel. That's the most out of character thing I've seen in the series. Just joking, but anyway, the main plot is, you know, has to do with Boomhauer's stepson Luke Jr. And Hank gets some chickens. Luke starts watching after them because Boomhauer decides it's a good activity for him. Luke's chicken phenotypically becomes a rooster, and some expert comes and check. Oh yeah, chickens can do that sometimes. And then the part that bothers me is they throw in these strawmen. These strawmen, like stereotypical conservatives, I guess you could say. They're not dressed stereotypically, but they're like, "Oh, this is gender ideology. Oh, this is transgenderism. This is awful ideas you're putting in our kids' heads." Just because Luke Jr. wants to put his like now rooster chicken into a rooster crowing contest, and these parents are like, "Oh, what do you want next? Boys and girls competing against each other?" Hank is like, "No, we're not talking about that." But so yeah, I already mentioned that. That's the thing. That's the thing. Is that the main plot of the show of that episode is that Boomhauer is learning to break through Luke's mom's protectiveness. That's a good message. The dad has to like take the kid out of their comfort zone and, know when the mom's being overprotective and everything. And then they throw in this like little subtle pro transgender thing in there because Hank doesn't like explicitly talk against transgenderism. They just kind of subtly throw it in there. You know what I mean? They're like, oh yeah, we have this expert, and they say that chickens can become roosters. And look at these crazy people. They're like, oh, it's gender ideology. Look how crazy they are. And maybe it's just me, but it just seems like a subtle way, like the thing I said when they're just like inching towards the woke stuff, just enough to not scare off too many people. I got my chud glasses on. I got my anti woke lens. I can see it. I can see it. But anyway, just joking. Well, not joking, but exaggerating the chud lens thing. But anyway, so yeah, that's what upsets me about the episodes. They throw that, but other than that, I actually like the main plot. Like I like the Bobby and Connie thing, and I like the point about Boomhauer. Um, knowing when the overprotection is too much. That's actually good. But then that's how they wrap it in there. They wrap in the like woke thing with actually good stuff. And they wrapped up the wokest thing with some of the best plots in the show, I think. And maybe it's just me, but I feel like that was on purpose. But anyway, this is just supposed to be a rundown, so I'm not going to linger on it for much longer. I've already lingered on for way too long, if you ask me. But anyway, next episode is No Cuddle Offense. I actually like this episode. It's actually a funny episode. Like I do believe Bill is lonely enough to go to some sort of cuddle therapy thing. and all the guys are in character, and it's funny, and they save Bill at the end, and it's just in general a decent episode. I got nothing much to say there. Anyway, episode 9, Reality Bites. And I don't have too much of a problem with this one. Not the ones that I don't already have with the others. Besides the weird pacing, usual stuff. But I do think the climax is really cartoony because Hank is like fixing a big tech statue and he falls off. And the climax is that Hank falls off and Dale like lassos his fishing magnet onto Hank by swinging it over the statue and grabbing Hank by his tool belt. And maybe it's just me, but that just feels a little too cartoony again, kind of like the Bill Dog thing. But the Bobby plot's okay. I think it's a bit out of character for Bobby to allow all the flirting on the King of the Grill show, but I can kind of let it slide since we don't really know Bobby that much. During the time skip, he was a young kid. Maybe he developed in ways we don't realize. Maybe he isn't as, he maybe doesn't consider that stuff as sacred as his dad would. As much as I might not like it, but anyway, it's a pretty minor complaint if it's valid at all. Anyway, number 10 and the last episode of the newest season is Propane Recall. And I feel like the episode has a good idea, even if it's a bit fan fiction-y, if you know what I mean. It's a bit fan wish fulfillment for Hank to become the manager. And it's a good idea, but it's got very poor execution. Because, they have all this build up to Hank and Strickland, and then he goes to Buck, and Buck's like crying. Well, not literally crying, but he's like going to Hank, begging him to be the manager because his son Ray Roy messed up the business. And Hank just kind of rejects it. And I feel like they shouldn't have had Hank reject it. They should have had him accept Buck's initial offer. Because later on, he just drives by Strickland. He's like, oh, it's awful. And then he decides to buy 51% and become manager that way. But it just makes kind of the previous buildup less meaningful. Because you see, if you had Hank just drive across Strickland Propane any other time, because he's just had this arbitrary avoidance of it since, apparently, that they just threw in there. But you see, if they just had him drive by it, it feels like he would have wanted to become manager anyway after seeing it all ruined and stuff. He would have feels like he would have become manager without all that buildup. So it makes the buildup feel meaningless. But if he accepted Buck's offer, it would have connected all the buildup in a meaningful way and made it actually worth something. But yeah, that's just me. That's just what I think of it. So I don't like that episode because the way it's structured. I feel like it's kind of a sloppy way to wrap up that plot point that a lot of people have been wanting for a long time. I would have been fine with Hank never becoming the manager, but if they were going to do it, I feel like they could have done it that way, the way I described. But anyway, those are my thoughts on it. That's about it. I'm not sure if I like the newest season more or less than the last one. Maybe I have to rewatch it. Maybe I'll do another video if this one does well. Maybe I'll do one more in depth on this one, or maybe I'll just do one on the last season. I'm probably going to quote unquote find ways to watch the next season if it comes out, but I don't expect much good. Like I said, I expect it to be like a subtle woke reboot. But that's just my opinion, though. Let me know what you guys think. I'd especially be interested in hearing the opinions of other chuddy types of guys if they differ from mine. But yeah, that's about it. Let me know what you think. Goodbye.